We all love a rags to riches story, especially in art history, whether it's Basquiat breaking out from street poverty to the global art scene, or Frida Kahlo bedridden from an accident and penniless when she first picked up a paintbrush. The romantic idea that the greats did it all by themselves, simply being discovered because their work was too brilliant to ignore. It's completely false. But the idea of the tortured artist who stayed true to their vision despite a lack of recognition began with one man, and the damage that this romantic ideal has done has plagued artists for over a century. Vincent van Gogh was a genius, but the story of his legacy as a solo talent needs to stop. I'll explain later. Firstly, I don't want to douse the flames of meritocracy. There is great hope in these stories for every struggling artist, but the truth is actually way more inspiring. No matter what tools you use, no major artist in history has ever made it alone. They have all had help in collaboration, in creation, and in curation. They all had patrons, promoters, or even critics who accidentally amplified their work. And this has always been the case. Caravaggio cozied up to a cardinal, and that's how he got all his wealthy clients. Leonardo did the same with a duke. And it's continued in art forever. Cézanne, considered by many, including me, as the godfather of modern art, rejected over and over again by the stuffy Paris salons, never selling out, and therefore paved the way for a century of explorative and fascinating painting. How pure of him to stick to his vision. Well, Cézanne's dad founded a very successful bank and owned a huge hat business. Even when the Paris salon rejected his submissions, he could afford to continue his painting because of the allowances from his father. He could struggle for his vision because Cézanne never had to sell his work to survive. We are constantly fed the lie that if works alone are good enough, the cream will float to the top. But shit also floats, and if anyone's been privileged enough to meet those at the top of creative professions, I can assure you that both are true. The British working class artists who've made millions now in their later years, Tracey Emin or Damien Hirst, did not come from nothing. They were selected by the powerful ad man Saatchi. He was in the back room generating controversy, which he understood as an ad man. He gave Hirst a near unlimited budget. And Emin even spoke about how she would never help a man whose ad campaigns actively got the government that devastated the working class into power a generation ago, until he wrote a high enough check. Now, you can call them all sellouts if you like, but that's often the only way to get success when your dad wasn't a bank manager. Would I do it if I was them? Hell yeah. I think Saatchi also did an amazing job with understanding art, controversy, and bringing it back into the mainstream in the 90s. I couldn't even show you much of the work that they made in this video without it getting flagged. Then, with the birth of the internet, there was a new way to get noticed. Social media came with the excitement that the gatekeepers were no longer needed, but artists now bemoan having to be social media content machines to even get noticed. They quip you'd never get Basquiat on a TikTok if he lived today, or Frida Kahlo live streaming from bed to please the AI patron of an algorithm. But it's just a different time. His posts were tags, his watch time metrics were shop face shutters, and Kahlo's father was a very famous photographer, and when she married Diego, he was already an established muralist, and his networks helped her. They both got success, they deserved it, and I am glad. Yet, some artists believe they are still self-made. If you are a creative and you gain 1 million followers on social media and you think you've made it and you say you're self-made, in fact, your equivalent of Saatchi is an algorithm with ulterior motives. You have to be monetizable to advertisers. You have to be safely in the socially accepted frame for violence, nudity, or language, which art often tends to question. You have to keep eyeballs engaged on the platform, be platform native in your content, and it must be accessible fairly instantaneously, which does not always parallel with deep or nuanced content. So if you are a creator who hates AI and has success online, you have AI to thank. And many artists, actors, and musicians are all increasingly told to to play this game. I'm one of those artists. And as much as I love the romantic idea of the pure artist who refuses to sell out, that idea has also done a lot of damage. And who do you think of when we think of an artist in history who stayed pure to their vision in obscurity? The man himself. Who lived in poverty, fought with madness, and worked feverishly while the world ignored him. He sold almost nothing. He had no recognition. The myth is clear. The solitary genius, suffering for art, doing it all on his own. His paintings then finding notoriety later, simply because they were before their time. But that story is wrong. Vincent is one of my favourite artists. But even he had a lot of help. And I want to honour the largely unknown patrons of Van Gogh via my Patreon. So if you want to help this channel so that I don't have to rely on the whims of an AI algorithm, you can check it out after this video. And for the price of a coffee, you can become a member. Exclusive to patrons is a video where I talk about who really cut off Van Gogh's ear. But this video is about who supported him. And interestingly, the people who we have to thank for bringing Vincent's work to global attention are not always people of influence. We often think of patrons as wielding power to support the output. We kind of wish to push aside the patrons who support the input as though it takes away some of the magic, but it doesn't. Most of Van Gogh's most powerful pictures were made when he was at his most mentally tormented. Dr. Paul Gogh treated Van Gogh in the very final months of his life, and he encouraged him to keep painting when almost no one else would. Van Gogh struggled on the brink of sanity, and this man helped him so much that he also saw how much painting meant to him, sitting for Vincent when few would. He believed art was medicine for Vincent's mind, and when he released Van Gogh from care, knowing he was not fully stable, he did so because he understood that painting was the only thing really holding him together. You can see viscerally the conflict on his face in this portrait. In May 1990, this picture sold for $82 million. That's nearly $200 million today. It was the world's most expensive painting at the time, an ode, if you will, to the very fact that we wouldn't have these later paintings if it wasn't for him. You have to remember that Van Gogh was an incredibly difficult man. In the village in which he was painting at the time, there was a petition from over 30 other villagers to have him removed from the village. And that's what makes Joseph Rollin so extraordinary. He was Van Gogh's postman, and at a time when Van Gogh was totally shunned from society, Rollin not only let him paint him, he introduced his whole family to him. And during his mental health crisis, Vincent wrote how Rollin was his only real friend. It is impossible to overstate how important this was to a man who, in those very letters that Rollin was carrying, stated over and over again of his incredible loneliness. Rollin never lived to see Vincent's success. There was nothing in it for him. He was simply a kind man to a very troubled man. Without him, as Vincent's only joyful interaction, it's hard to imagine that Vincent would see or paint the beauty in people at all. But who were these letters sent to? And that takes me on to the third patron, perhaps the most important co-creator of Vincent's work, his brother Theo. Without Theo, there simply is no Van Gogh. Vincent was never able to support himself. He couldn't hold down a job. He could barely talk to people. He provided everything, listened in these endless letters, and believed in him. He was even the one who introduced Van Gogh to painting. He bought the paints, the canvases, the brushes. He stopped the family trying to send him away when they feared the news of his psychosis would stop his sisters getting married, for they believed madness was in the blood. Throughout history, there are countless troubled, truly brilliant people who struggled just as Van Gogh did, but almost none of them were lucky enough to have a Theo. Yet even Theo, art gallery owner himself, could not successfully sell any of Van Gogh's paintings. And that brings us to the most forgotten and undervalued person in the story of Van Gogh's success. After both men died, Theo sadly very shortly after Vincent, Joanna Van Gogh, Vincent's sister-in-law, is who we can thank for bringing his work to the limelight. She is the reason the world knows Vincent at all. She inherited hundreds of his paintings when he was a forgotten failure. She tirelessly translated all of his letters to Theo and travelled with these paintings to get rejected over and over again, and protected his work fiercely. She was called overly sentimental, she was called stupid and ignorant about art by dealers in multiple countries, yet in time, her passion pulled people to finally see the brilliance of his fine line between brutality and the beauty of life. Every single Van Gogh you admire today exists because Joanna refused to let it die. But I don't mean by any of this to burst the bubble, as Van Gogh was a genius, but his legacy and the wealth around his name now hurts, because as you travel to the next Van Gogh exhibition, as I will, you will pass people on the street, people who struggle to find a place in society just like Vincent, with the potential for as much raw, unharnessed talent and vision to see the beauty and the pain of life as Vincent, but who are unfortunate in not having a Theo to support them. And I wonder what Van Gogh would really want from us. And when you go to these shows, I want you to think about everyone else who helped him bringing his story to you. Because while it starts with someone, there is a huge community in any creative production, whether that's a single person or 1,000-person crew. I want to thank the patrons of this channel, with a shout out to my co-producers, Clementine and Keelan. So if Van Gogh couldn't do it on his own, neither can you, and neither can I. Hopefully we can all support each other and keep human creativity alive long into this world of AI. Speak soon.